When I think the word hood, I often think of a person, a place, and perhaps even a thing. I'm Sir Creepsta, and welcome to Muhlenberg County Ghost Stories from the Hood. Tonight's tale of terror is entitled Footprints in the Snow, Skunk Ape of Muhlenberg County. When telling the stories from the hood, let me be crystal clear. They don't always involve ghosts, demons, or anything remotely supernatural. There are those stories that dealt with worldly entities that were much more human-like. Two-footed creatures that seemingly roamed the hood as well. Although there have been several of these types of stories, there's one in particular that once again involved myself as well as my younger brother. It's one that terrified us so much as kids that after experiencing it firsthand, it will be months before we will be caught dead outside after dark. And many years later, we still get cold chills just mentioning it to one another. So sit back, relax, grab some snacks, and be terrified by yet another Muhlenberg County ghost story from the hood. Back in 1974, my brother and I were two young kids growing up in the hood. He was 8 and I was the 11-year-old big brother. To my brother and I, Central City appeared to have had two sides. There was a good side that as kids most of us were fortunate enough to have been a part of. But there was also the early, dark, and creepy side that would hide its face until night or early morning. For weeks leading up to the event that I'm about to talk about, there was a strange feeling in the air. It felt as if something or someone was lurking in the shadows, waiting on the right time to show its ugly presence. And believe me, this wouldn't take long. The house that we lived in at the time was located about 100 feet from the railroad tracks that passed through the hood. There weren't any street lights near the tracks, so at night you couldn't see anything on them, other than the lights of the train's engine whenever it passed through the hood. The weather had started to warm up, so I find myself spending many a night outside on our front porch. It was a concrete porch, so I'd usually find myself lying on it, soaking up the coolness that it provided to my body. While lying there, I often hear sounds of animals either walking or running back and forth up the tracks, but rarely being able to see any of them. This pattern would go on the entire summer whenever I found myself outside on our porch. By the fall, the sounds had intensified so much that they had begun to sound creepy whenever I heard them. Because Central City was so small and my family was so large, there was always a relative or two living nearby. In this particular story, the nearby relative happened to be my great-grandmother, who lived directly across the tracks from us. Granny and my mama would see one another usually on a daily basis. Either was Granny over at our house, or was my mama over at hers. Fall had come and winter had set in. On one winter night, Granny made a later than usual visit to our house. I was the one that heard her knocking at the door, and when I went to open the door, she looked past me and began asking for Mama. The two of them went into the kitchen, and I could barely hear her and Mama talking. Their conversation was short, but at the point. Although I was unable to make out everything that was said, I was able to make out the part about the wild man or creature Granny said that had been spotted down near the poi. Immediately my heart started racing as a feeling of pure fear overtook my entire body. I then went into me and my brother's room and I told him what I'd overheard Mama and Granny talking about. However, being as young as my brother was at the time, he really didn't understand what I was telling him about the supposed sighting of the wild man or creature. Although my brother had lots of questions pertaining to the subject, it really didn't hit him the way that it hit me, except that he really wanted to know just how far away the boy was from us. Because I happened to play Little League Baseball down and around that area of the county, I was able to assure him that the boy wasn't close at all to where we lived, and that we were safe. So finally, around 10 p.m. or so, we both fell asleep. My daddy was an avid hunter at the time, and he owned about 3 or 4 hound dogs that he used whenever he decided to go hunting. The pen in which he housed his dogs was located on the back side of the house closest to my brother's bedroom. For the most part, they weren't noisy dogs at all, considering their breed. But on this particular night, that would all change. I can't recall the exact time that the loud, constant barking started. All I remember is waking up to Mama asking my daddy to do something about those loud A dogs. By now I had gotten up and was sitting on the side of the bed, and I saw my daddy getting dressed and then grabbing his 12-gauge shotgun out of his gun cabinet, and minutes later heading out the front door. He wasn't gone long, as the dogs seemed to immediately stop barking once they heard my daddy's voice telling them to quiet down all that racket that they were making. Once Daddy had gotten back inside, I overheard him telling Mama that the only thing he saw was all the snow that had fallen the night before, and that he didn't know what could have caused his dogs to have gotten so stirred up the way that they had. Hearing this brought a huge sigh of relief all over me and my brother, who by now had woke up also. Not long after hearing this, my brother and I dozed off once again. As soon as daylight hit, I was wide awake, and then it suddenly hit me that Daddy had told Mama that it had snowed. So out of anticipation of seeing just how much snow had actually fallen, I pulled back the curtains in front of our bedroom window, and to my disbelief, what I saw filled my body with complete and utter fear. For leading up to the window beside our bed was a pair of the largest footprints I had ever seen. At the time, I wore a size 12, and I could clearly see that my shoes could have easily fit inside the tracks outside my window, with plenty of room to spare. My brother and I shared bunk beds at the time, and I recall shaking him like crazy to wake him up and see for himself the enormous footprints left in the snow. Once my brother was fully awake, he too saw them and, like me, was scared to death at the sight of them. We both jumped up and ran into our parents' room looking for our daddy to tell him about our discovery. Daddy was already dressed and was about to head off for work, but upon hearing our story, he immediately stopped in his tracks and grabbed the shotgun that he had left beside the front door. He then ran out the door to check up on his dogs. To his surprise, not only were the large footprints beside our window, they were all over the side of the house. He then walked around the back side of the house to see if he could tell where the tracks had come from. But because of the large amount of snow that had fallen, he was unable to do so. Although my daddy wasn't able to determine who or what had made the extremely large footprints, that wasn't the case for my brother and I. There wasn't a doubt in our minds that the footprints had been made by the same and exact wild man or creature that Granny had told Mama about the night before. And to this very day, there's not a doubt in my mind that the creature and his family still roam the hoods and the woods of Muhlenberg County. I'm Sir Creepsta, and until next time, stay terrified.